Welcome everyone to episode 8 of the Extra Minutes podcast revamp edition. On Extra Minutes, we take a look at what athletes, coaches, and sports personnel do with their time off the field to better themselves and others. And today we're joined by Olympic gold medalist, two-time NCAA Wrestling All-American, and current executive director of the Pennsylvania Regional Training Center, Brandon Slay. Brandon, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Maria. Appreciate you asking me to be on.
We're super excited to have you here and just, talk about all that you've done so far in your career and in your coaching. And a lot of the guests that we've had on so far have been athletes, and you were an athlete. Now you're a coach. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But first, I want to start off right at the beginning. How did you actually get involved with wrestling in the first place?
So I was born and raised in Amarillo, Texas, which is a kind of far cry from West Philly, where I went to school. I'm sure we'll talk about that later. But my dad wrestled in high school and college, and I think he just thought his little 6-year-old blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid would like wrestling too. So he took me to the local YMCA boys club, which was the boys club back then. And they had practice that night, and I think he just hoped I would enjoy it. And I actually did, but I didn't enjoy it so much because of the wrestling piece, because I just got pummeled that first night, first week, first month. I think I really enjoyed it because I made some friends, and I connected with some of those kids, and pretty quickly they asked me to come stay the night at their house and jump on their trampoline, and their moms are good cooks. And so I think I always tell parents and coaches how important it is for these little kids to build good friendships, because sometimes kids stick with the sport not so much because they just adore the sport early on, but it's because it's social, and it's because they feel acceptance and they feel part of something because of those friendships. So I would say the beginning of my wrestling career, friendships are what kept me in it, but it was my dad that started me in wrestling at 6.
I love how you say that, because I think about some of my closest friends now, and they're literally all people that I played softball with. Like, that has been my core group from the time I was little. So definitely a big part of sport in general. And then, so you started 6, you like how people's moms cook, you have good friends, everything's going pretty well. How did you start to progress and realize it was something that you wanted to continue to do and maybe pursue a little more adamantly?
Well, I think the progression was definitely not immediate. My first year in wrestling, my record was 0-20. So I lost every single match. And my grandmother used to always argue with me when I'd tell people that, because she would say, you didn't lose every match. You won that one match because the kid didn't show up, and you won by forfeit, right? And you got your hand raised. And I always tell her, I call her Meemaw. I'm a big time Meemaw's boy, by the way. But I would say, Meemaw, that didn't count because I didn't even get a chance to wrestle. And I didn't beat the kid. She's like, but you made weight. You showed up. You did something he didn't do. So she always counted it as a win. The long story short is that first year was definitely unsuccessful in the record books. But back to our original point, because of those friendships, because of a full year of developing just great friendships, I wanted to go back the second year and be around these guys, these kids. And my second year, the very first tournament I wrestled in, I actually won my first match. So, and I think there's a good lesson there, because my dad kind of took me to the side before I wrestled in that tournament and said, look, clearly we know you haven't won a match yet, but I just want you to know I'm not putting any pressure on you. Your grandmother's not putting any pressure on you. Your coaches I know aren't, your friends aren't. I want you to go out there and wrestle, compete for you. No pressure from us. We're going to love you regardless. Win, lose, or draw, we love you regardless. We're going to be here regardless. Nobody's love is changing. It's unconditional. So I don't think he used the term unconditional, because I wouldn't have known what that meant at 6. I think he just said, we're all still going to love you. And I just thought, really? And he's like, yeah. And so I went out there and I won my very first match, which in wrestling, you shake hands, and you get your hand raised, which is exhilarating for a 7-year-old at the time. And I just realized, man, that was fun. I want some more of that. Right. And then I think I won 7 matches that year, but I still lost 15. So I started a losing record. But again, I was kind of hooked a little bit. And even though I still had an overall losing record, I had great friendships. I knew what winning tasted like. I started actually liking wrestling liking the sport, just the challenge of getting better at moves, double legs and single legs, and just the grit of it, I started enjoying. And so, but my third year, I finally had a winning record. And then, fourth year, fifth year, sixth year, I would say that's when the successful snowball really started rolling downhill.
I love that because I feel like you hear a lot from parents where they're very strict on their kids. And I feel like I was really lucky in that my dad was like very similar to that. He was like, if you want to do it, you do it. We'll still, like you said, love unconditionally. He probably didn't say that either. But so the ball starts rolling and you're going to get to high school then. And how did you do in high school? And then how did you eventually get to University of Pennsylvania?
Yes, I continued to wrestle throughout middle school and high school, and I became really focused on being a dual sport athlete. So wrestling was important to me, but football was really important to me as well. Being in Texas, I started playing football in fifth grade, played football all the way through high school, and I would say it was really just as important to me as wrestling, and in many ways probably more fun because I went out there, on the field with 10 other guys and we were doing it together, just like you in softball. You walk out on the field with your teammates. Wrestling's different than that. You go out there by yourself. Like there's nobody out there to help you. If you're in a tough situation, there's nobody to, for your analogy for you, there's nobody to, to catch the ball. There's nobody to get a hit when they really need it. It's like you're supposed to catch every ball. You're supposed to get every hit, right? And football gave me that, I would say, mutual accountability with teammates, which was fun. Where wrestling, it was a lot harder. But because I ended up maxing out in high school, I was about 5'8", 185. And there's not a lot of college football players that are 185-pound guys, especially playing middle linebacker, the position I played, nose guard, middle linebacker. And so it kind of came down to decision, Maria. It came down to, I think I could have played college football. I received some letters to play college football, but I thought I could have been a good college football player, maybe very good. But wrestling, I thought I had the opportunity to become great. And I didn't want good to get in the way of great. And by the time I was, again, 17 years old, you're not the most mature person on the planet, and you're not necessarily making decisions all for the right reasons. And so, I chose wrestling because I think I was just focused on greatness at the time.
And it seemed to work out for you because you did get to the University of Pennsylvania, and you were, four-time All-Ivy League there, right?
I was four-time All-Ivy League, and then I ended up my goal was to be an NCAA champion. And in college wrestling, if you place in the top 8 in the nation, you're an All-American. So I got second in the nation twice, so I was a 2-time All-American, but I came up short of being a national champ. And, kind of back to, your original question is why Penn, is that also realized when I was probably around 7th grade, 6th or 7th grade, I started kind of experiencing this joy from making good grades. When I'd get my hand raised on the wrestling mat, I considered that a win, clearly. But then when I would get a test back and make an A or 100 or, high 90s, something like that, I would also experience that as a win. And I started kind of having fun making good grades. And so what that just meant, I wanted to win on the wrestling mat, football field, and I wanted to win in the classroom. And so I started focusing on being the best student I could be. And then because I made really good grades in high school, I had the opportunity to get into an Ivy League school. So the University of Pennsylvania is an Ivy League school. And to be really candid, when I was in high school, if you'd have said, hey, do you know about Penn? I was like most people in the South. I would have said, oh, yeah, Penn State, Coach Paterno. I didn't understand the difference between Penn and Penn State. But once I got called by the coach from both schools, I talked to the Penn State coach and the Penn coach. I was like, oh, these are different places. And clearly I learned Penn was a private school. It was an Ivy League school. It was in Philadelphia. Penn State is in Happy Valley. And interestingly enough, I actually visited both schools. I visited 3 Pennsylvania schools: Lehigh, Penn State, and Penn. And then I visited the University of Wisconsin, and I visited the University of Illinois. So 3 Big Ten schools, two big school. And so I end up realizing that, thankfully, that you can't wrestle for the rest of your life. There's going to be a period of time that, respectfully to you, that you're not going to play softball anymore. You're not going to play football anymore. Even NFL players, there's a period of time they're not playing football anymore. I realized there's going to be a period of time I wasn't going to be wrestling anymore. So my education was really, really important to me. And so ultimately I ended up choosing to go to Penn. And a lot of people still wondered why I made that decision, because they had not had an All-American in, I believe, 33 years.
Wow.
So the last time that All-American, I think, was like 1966. This guy named Ted Lansky did it for Penn. So when I chose to go to Penn, it's like, Brandon, you want to be an All-American? They haven't even had one in 30 plus years. You want to be a national champion. They haven't had one in, whatever, since 1941. So that's the school you chose to go to. And I did, because there was always something part of me that I really, it was appealing to me to be a trailblazer or a pioneer. And maybe it's because where I come from in North Texas, there's a lot of that kind of trailblazing, pioneering spirit in North Texas. And I think for me, I thought, well, how cool would it be to be one of the first All-Americans in 30 plus years at Penn? And so ultimately the education, Ivy League school, and I got accepted to the Wharton School of Business. I wanted to major in business. So that was a big part of it as well. And then just the trailblazing spirit to try to become an All-American at Penn.
The mindset, I love how it's like, oh, well, why can't that be me? Instead of looking at, oh, they never had this. I just think that I don't know. I think it's so interesting and it's so inspiring for so many people, because so many people would say, well, this doesn't look great, but you kind of looked for a way to make it work, which kind of leads me to my next question. Like you said, you were in the Wharton School of Business, you're at an Ivy League school. How did you balance, the academics of Ivy League life with being a Division I wrestler and competing at, such a high level of Division I wrestling?
Well, my time at Penn, being a student athlete, was I would say it was way more challenging than living at the Olympic Training Center training for the Olympics. Because at the Olympic Training Center, I didn't have 4 or 5 classes. Mm-hmm. All I was doing was training, right? And it's still amazing to me too. People will say, oh my gosh, I bet it was so hard to train for the Olympics. Like, I bet all the hours you put in, so that was so challenging. And I always kind of like, tell them now, and they think I'm joking, but I'll say, like, actually training for the Olympics is compared to being a student athlete at Penn, or for sure now compared to being married with 4 kids, like relatively, it was like way easier, because all I had to do while training for the Olympics was really very self-centered. And there wasn't the academic piece. It was just lifting weights, wrestling, and cardio, and taking care of myself, right? Where Penn was challenging because I had classes clearly in the college. I had classes in the Wharton School of Business. To manage those 4 to 5 classes, with a lot of times having sprints at 7 a.m. in the morning, having wrestling practice from about 4 to 6 at night, just managing all that, I would say, was really challenging. And my first semester was the hardest, because I was 30 hours away from home. I was away from my support system. It's not like I could just drive home on the weekend, or fly home on the weekend. I was across the country. And so, my first semester, I always tell people, I'm not afraid to tell anybody, but my first semester I made a 2.25, which, being a straight A student, that was not good for me. I saw that as like losing a wrestling match. I saw that as failure. And so I had to step back and go, hey, am I in the right place? Did I make the right decision? Am I doing the right things? And ultimately I realized that I had made the right decision. I just wasn't managing my time wisely. And I was being too prideful to ask for help. I think what's interesting about athletes is that we have no problem asking a coach for help. Hey, coach, could you help me with my swing? Hey, coach, could you help me with, with my technique in wrestling? But a lot of times we're too prideful to ask a professor for help, or too prideful to ask a teacher's assistant for help, because we feel like, oh, once we do that, then we're showing that we don't know it all. Well, we're willing to ask those questions in sports, but a lot of times we're not willing to do it academically. And I had to just swallow my pride and realize I need to get some tutors. I need to get some help. I need to go in the TA's office and work on these things in calculus and economics. And once I made the commitment to get tutors, to go see the TAs, swallow my pride, humble myself, eat a big slice of, humble pie, which I always tell people that's the most nutritious food on the planet, if they don't know, is humble pie. You have some of that. And then the next semester with the tutors and the academic focus I had, I made a 3.0. And then my third semester in sophomore year, I made a 3.3. And then ultimately I graduated with a 3.3, but kind of like my wrestling career when I was 0-20, it didn't start, you know, on an amazing path. And I think that's a good lesson really for anybody to learn. I think nowadays we live in a culture where people, this fast food culture, this, you text me back, you better text me back 10 seconds later. I email you, better email me back, a minute later. I think we're in this culture where we expect everything so quick and so fast, but Maria, that's not how dreams work. That's not how goals work. That's not how accomplishing, huge things in life. It doesn't happen just like that.
I think that's like such an important lesson for, younger people too. Like you're saying, this fast culture. And I always tell people too, if you can get through that first fall semester as like a student athlete, like you're going to be okay, but it's getting through, like you're saying, you're away from home. You have to do all these different things, and swallowing, or what is it? Taking a big bite of the humble pie, as you put it, is
That's
so
right.
important, because I feel like I had the same situation where I was like, I really loved school. I was always getting A's, and I had to get a tutor my first semester of college. And that was just like so hard for me, because that was never anything that I had to, deal with before. But you also mentioned, training at the Olympics. What was the process of, going from Penn to the Olympics? Like, how did that even work?
So because of the success I'd had in high school, and then in college, there's a tournament called the University Nationals, which, to keep things simple for your listeners, there's essentially two styles of wrestling. There's what's called American, like folk style wrestling, what we do in college. And then there's the international styles, which that's what's done in the Olympics. The rules are just a little different. And I'd had a lot more success in the international styles, the Olympic styles. And because I'd had that success in the international styles, my freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, I was recruited by the Olympic Training Center. They said, hey, would you consider when you graduate from Penn to move out to Colorado Springs and to train at the Olympic Training Center full time, is what they would call as a resident athlete. So I would live at the Olympic Training Center. I'd get free rent, free food, and I would just, just train there every day. And I just thought that was the best decision for me, because Claire, I grew up in Texas. I moved 30 hours away from home to the East Coast for 5 years. And then I thought coming back out kind of west, being closer to home, which Colorado Springs is only 5 hours from Amarillo, Texas, where I was born and raised, because Amarillo, Texas is at the top of Texas. And so I thought coming back closer to home, my family, not my hometown, but a little closer, and I'd always loved Colorado, was the right decision. So I got accepted to the program at the Olympic Training Center. So after I graduated from Penn in May of 1998, I moved out to Colorado Springs in August 1998. And then I essentially had 2 full years to train for the Sydney Olympics in Australia.
And, you ended up doing pretty well. I won't give it away. If you want to walk us through what it was like actually competing at Sydney, and then the end result.
Yeah. So a lot of people, they always ask, a lot of people like, oh, like my guys I'm coaching now, like, are you taking guys to the Olympics? Or like, well, you just don't get to take guys to the Olympics. They have to make the team first, which is the most challenging thing. They have to make the team first. And the only way you make the team, you have to be the best guy in the country at your weight class. So right now in the Olympics, there's only 6 weight classes. So you have to be the best guy in the whole entire country at your weight class. If you're the number 2 wrestler, the number 3 wrestler, you don't go to the Olympics. So for me, it was this process of, against kind of my MO, I guess, a little bit. In 1999, I got 6th in the nation, which, you may say, well, gosh, 6th in the nation, that's really good. Maybe you'd say that. But if you want to be first in the world, there's a difference between 6th in the country in the United States and first on the planet.
Right.
So in 1999, I definitely didn't have a great year. And then again, it was kind of the fork in the road. Are you going to see yourself as only 6th and think that you don't have a chance to make the Olympic team and you might as well retire and move on? Or do you realize, well, I got 6th in the nation, but only lost to the national champ by 1 point in overtime.
Right.
And he got 4th in the world that year. So that's how I saw it. I saw, the guy that beat me only beat me by a point in overtime. He got 4th in the world. I think I can beat him. So if he's 4th in the world right now, I saw myself as 4th in the world, 3rd in the world. And so I took that path and I saw myself that way, which is why I'm just thankful I stuck to it that next year. And then that next year, that guy who had beat me the year before, who was fourth in the world. I had him in the national finals. I was 0-4 against him. He beat me in the NCAA finals. He's from the University of Iowa. His name's Joe Williams. He'd beat me in the Iowa Penn Duel. He beat me in the NCAA finals. He beat me in the finals of another tournament called Midlands. He beat me year before the Olympics. So again, I was 0-4 against him. And then finally in 2000, which was the most important match I'd ever had against him, in the national finals, I beat him. And then I went on to wrestle in the Olympic trials, which are in Dallas, Texas. It was the first time I'd ever had the Olympic trials in Texas. And I just happened to be the only person from Texas in the whole entire tournament. And I end up, Russ made the finals that night and made the Olympic team, and which was in many ways that was almost more special than the Olympics because it was in my home state. There's about 400 people from my hometown that drove down to Dallas to be there. So that was really special in its own right. But then yes, to make the Olympic team, represent our country, which a lot of people, they don't realize when you make the Olympic team, you're not just representing your high school anymore, your college anymore. You don't wear those colors. You're wearing the red, white, and blue, and there's a USA right on your back. And to walk out on the mat in Sydney, Australia, and represent our nation, and then clearly, the goal was to be an Olympic champion and to eventually stand on top of that podium and have a gold medal around my neck was priceless.
What was it, you talked before about getting your hand raised on the mat and how that is so exhilarating. What about getting your hand raised in Sydney as, the champion of the world?
I always tell people that the best feeling I would say is just a feeling of there's the exuberance that comes, but that happens pretty quickly. But then it's a feeling I always tell people of like peace and kind of like warmth. And sometimes they think that's strange, but what I mean by that is just this peace and warm feeling that you have knowing that from when you started when you're 6 years old, all the thousands and thousands of hours you put in during all those years, middle school, high school, college, all the sacrifices you made. And then 19 years later, to know that it was mission accomplished and that dream came to fruition. It's just kind of that, it's just there's this peaceful feeling that comes from that, knowing that that's something, no one can ever take away from you. And I think that's what was really special on the award stand when I finally did get my gold medal is, the lady told me to bend down my head. I bent my head down and she put the gold medal around my neck and she said, "You will forever be Olympic champion." Right. And so again, that's not like exuberance. That's more of just like this, just like I just call this just a warm feeling that comes over you. It's just to know that that's something that nobody can ever take away from you. And like, again, forever be Olympic champion. I mean, that's a long time. Right. But I would say, which we can get into this down the road too, but that's a really special feeling. But I would say what's even more special than that though, is that you realize how connected you are to all these people that were there for you to help accomplish that. Clearly, my dad got me started. My grandmother supported me all those years. My youth coaches, high school coaches, college coaches, coach at the Olympic Training Center, all of my support system. To be able to share in that with all those people is actually, it makes it even more special.
I think that I'm getting chills. You talk about the warm feeling, but I'm getting chills when you explain, the forever being an Olympic champion. But I think what you just said kind of segues really well into what I want to talk about next is, now you are the coach and you are the person helping other people, like you said at the beginning, realize their dreams. So what made you kind of want to transition from being that wrestler, being the athlete to becoming a coach?
I never, ever told anybody I ever wanted to be a coach. That was never part of my dream. Let me tell my daughter something really quick. Savannah, sweetie, I'm on a call. Okay. I can't open the door right now. Sorry. Okay. We'll talk to mommy about that. Sorry. Again, it's part of having 4 kids and doing some fun Zoom calls at home. But I think the answer, Maria, is that I didn't go to the University of Pennsylvania, and no disrespect to coaches or anything like that. I mean, I am one, so I can speak on this behalf. But I didn't choose to go to Penn to be a coach. I didn't choose to go to the Wharton School of Business. I didn't say, hey, I want to go to Wharton because I want to be a coach.
Right.
A lot of people go to Wharton because clearly they want to focus on finance or marketing or management. So I never, ever dreamed of being a coach. I never told anybody I was going to be a coach. I never envisioned being a coach. I never thought I was going to be a coach. And I started my life in the business world and commercial real estate in Dallas, Texas, for multiple years. And, thankfully, I met my wife there, which I think there was, everything happens for a reason. But I started missing sport. I started missing wrestling. I started missing Olympism. I started missing the idea of just traveling around the world and potentially helping guys experience and accomplish what I had the opportunity to accomplish. And then it was after 2008, the Olympics were in Beijing that year, Maria, and we only had one medalist. He was Olympic champion, but we only had one. So for Team USA, that's not very good for us in wrestling, just to only have one. And so they decided to let the coaching staff go, and they hired a new coaching staff. So they hired a guy by the name of Zeke Jones, who happened to be the coach at Penn at the time. And so Zeke ends up becoming the national coach, head national coach, the head Olympic coach. And he calls me and just says, "Hey, Brandon, I don't know if you've ever thought about getting back involved with wrestling, but I need to hire an assistant coach, assistant national coach. I need somebody to help me, get us back on the world success train for wrestling." And at that period of time, I dated my, she was my girlfriend at the time, Tina. We've been dating about 2.5 years, and it just kind of really sped up the process because she was like, "Well, I'm not moving anywhere unless you put a ring on my finger," So that sped up that process. So I end up getting engaged. I ended up taking the job, and then ultimately, Tina and I both moved to Colorado Springs, and then I started coaching at the Olympic Training Center in 2009. And so that I did that for 8 years. So for 2 Olympic quads. So I helped coach our team in 2012 in London, and I helped coach our team in 2016 in Rio. So I put those 8 years into helping Team USA.
And so after those 8 years at Team USA, what was your next move in the coaching world?
Well, during those 8 years, that was such an honor. I had a chance to go to about 40 different countries. I took our wrestlers to Azerbaijan, Armenia, the country of Georgia, Uzbekistan, Madrid, Paris, Siberia, Cuba. Went to Cuba 5 times. I mean, I could keep going. But point being, that was just a great period of time in my life to be able to travel the world, coach wrestlers, pour into them. I'd say sharpen my leadership sword. That was really important. But what started happening, because I was traveling so much, it became a little challenging. Not a little, it became a lot challenging, for my family. I had 3 girls at the time. And so my wife, it was just hard. It was challenging for our family for me to leave for 12 days to Baku, Azerbaijan, and she's having to take care of everybody. And then I started missing some events of my daughters. And then I started realizing that, some dads or parents, they may miss some things. It's tough to make everything, but what you don't want to miss most things. And I started missing a lot, being gone 100 days a year. And so that's when I talked to my wife. We made the decision, is there anything else I can do where I travel less and I can be around more and still get to do what I love to do? And that's where, because I went to Penn, I'd connected with the leadership at Penn, the head coach at the time. And so we just had a conversation about an Olympic training center. And so there was a 501c3 that was started, a nonprofit organization. And that nonprofit was called the Pennsylvania Regional Training Center, which is what we call the PRTC. So the Pennsylvania Regional Training Center was started, and that they asked me if I wanted to be the executive director and head coach. So I moved from Colorado Springs to I live in Media, Pennsylvania now. And so I took that job at the end of 2016. So I've been doing this for about 4 years as the executive director and head coach of the PRTC.
That's amazing. I what you said about, missing most things and stuff. I remember my dad, he coached a bunch of different things, and he kind of made a similar decision where he was like, I'm not getting to see my daughters as much, and this is like what I want to do. How can I still make it work? So he kind of did a similar thing. But back to the PRTC, explain for people who don't really know what it is, like what you guys do there and kind of what your role is as executive director and head coach.
So at the Olympic Training Center, in Colorado Springs, is that my job was to run that program there. And so again, you're trying to recruit the best athletes in the country and world, develop them to become the best wrestlers in the world. And as a wrestling coach, Really simply, what you need to coach wrestlers is you need a wrestling room and you need wrestlers, and you need a wrestling room and you need wrestlers as training partners. Where do wrestling rooms and wrestlers as training partners exist? Colleges. So over the last, I guess it's been about 10 years now, it's become very common is that we have these, they're called regional training centers, which are these Olympic training centers. They have them at Penn State. It's called the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club. They have one at Lehigh called the Lehigh Valley Wrestling Club. They have one at University of Iowa called the Hawkeye Club. And I could keep going with, Cowboy Club at Oklahoma State. And so we have our Pennsylvania Regional Training Center. And so what that is, it's a nonprofit 501c3 Olympic training center where we train at Penn, and actually we train at Drexel as well, because Drexel is only 1 block away. So Drexel has a wrestling room, and Drexel has a college wrestling team, Division I college wrestling team. So we're very extremely unique that our Olympic Training Center encompasses 2 Division I programs that are 1 block away. So, Penn has about 40 guys on the roster. Drexel has about 30 guys. So I have 70 college wrestlers and 2 college wrestling rooms that I can come into and bring my post-grads, my Olympic level guys who are already out of college. And so I can insert them into those 2 wrestling rooms with those partners. And it gives me the partners, college guys, Penn and Drexel guys. It gives me the wrestling room. There's 2 of them. And then it allows me to have, I would say, wise counsel from the college coaches at Penn and the college coaches at Drexel. And we can kind of all do this together, as I would say, we kind of call it the Philly wrestling ecosystem. We can kind of do this as a group of coaches and athletes together. And it's really just been a very unique and, healthy way to develop, my Olympic level guys. And so a lot of people wonder, like, well, so what does that look like? Well, I think the best way to describe it is that Olympic level wrestling, we don't have the NFL and the NBA, Major League Baseball, right? That pays out millions of dollars to athletes to do a sport they love. But what we have now is this regional training center system where we have all these nonprofits that raise donations to make sure that we pay these guys a salary. And the PRTC, I think we're rare in that we pay our athletes a salary. We provide them health insurance through Independence Blue Cross. We provide them a 401k plan where we match up to 5% of their 401k that they put in, and a dental plan. And so then by state law, we also have workman's comp insurance. So, these athletes that choose to train for the PRTC, they're well taken care of. And, humbly, I hope they feel that they're in a good situation with me coaching them. And I hope that they understand just that there's so many individuals that are pouring into them and supporting them and helping them, reach their dreams on and off the mat.
And I think so my sister goes to Drexel, fun fact. I'll edit that out. Mm-hmm. She plays softball there. But I think it's really funny how you said, you never really wanted to be a coach, and now you looked for a way to stay in coaching because you enjoyed it so much. So what makes you love coaching and helping these guys? What is it about the profession that you love?
I think the best answer to that question is that I enjoy being the caretaker of dreams for these athletes, just because I know what it was like to have so many people pour into my dream and how special and meaningful that was for me. And if I can pay that forward, and I can be the caretaker of dreams for the guys I have on the team, Joey McKenna, Ethan Lezat, Dave McFadden, Mark Hall just joined us, Jordan Burroughs, Olympic champions, joined us next year. These wrestlers that are going to be part of our team, if I can help maximize their chance of accomplishing their Olympic dreams, that's really special. But I would say even more important than that, help them fulfill their dreams in life. Because yes, we talk about wrestling tons, and I'm going to help these guys learn wrestling moves, and we're going to go to tournaments all around the world. And yes, we're going to get better at wrestling. When I'm saying caretaker of dreams, I think a lot of people just think the athletic dream. But I think what separates the PRTC from other regional training centers is that we're also thinking about their dreams after wrestling. Do you want to use your engineering degree? Do you want to start your own, wrestling academy someplace? Do you want to, one of my wrestlers, Joey McKenna, wants to go to Wharton and get his MBA. Wow. And he wants to run a company one of these days, right? So it's taking care of their dreams on the mat, but also helping them maximize their potential when they're done with wrestling one of these days. And then that continues to move forward with, I'm very passionate about making sure these guys become the best men they can be, the best leaders they can be, have the best character they can have, because I want them to be the best husbands they can be, if they choose to get married, and then clearly the best fathers they can be if they choose to have children. Because what a huge disservice that we would provide if all we did is help athletes, help wrestlers become better at wrestling. If that's all we did. I think a lot of places that's all they focus on. But, our mission is to enrich lives, locally and globally through the sport of wrestling. And we think about that on the mat, but in many ways, we think about that more so off the mat with who they're going to become as leaders and servant leaders, in our society.
That's so incredible, because I feel like one thing that no one ever talks, like everybody talks about, stats and who's good at this and who's the best at the, like the big debate between who's the best ever, Jordan, Kobe, LeBron in basketball. But when you talk about beyond the mat, beyond the athlete, I just think that's so important to the world of sports in general, because that's kind of like the things that you remember more so. There's like a quote that I really like by Maya Angelou, and it says something like, people forget what you said and what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And I feel like when you're talking about this, that's exactly what you're exemplifying, like how you make people feel.
Well, and you have to think back. To me, it's kind of common sense. And I had a pretty long career, right? I started when I was 6 and I retired when I was 25. I mean, almost 20 years competing in a sport. I mean, most people that are athletes don't compete for 20 years.
Right.
I mean, that's a long time. Most people don't compete that long. So you're competing in a sport for 20 years, but then you're gonna be a leader in our society, right? For the next whatever, hopefully 60 years plus after that. So you need to be preparing people for that 40, 50, 60 years after sport, and not just for that 20 years when they're actually competing in sport. And I think, again, coaches are doing athletes a disservice if all they do is focus on the skills needed for their sport and not focusing on the skills needed to be a positive member of our society and to give back to our society, and to love other people, to serve other people, to think of others first. And I think that that's just a challenge, in sports, Maria, is because so many people in sport, it's like, hey, what can you do to help me? How can you help me, to use your sport? How can somebody help me make my swing better? How can somebody help my speed? I can run around the bases faster. How could somebody help me catch the ball better? We become a lot of times too self-centered. And I think that's a challenge for athletes. And I think that's, again, my job is to get these athletes to think about how they can become the best athlete they can be, but also thinking outside themselves. There's something greater than themselves, and how can they serve others? Which that's why, our 4 core values for the PRCC are: number 1, faith over fear, right? Confidence over fear. Most athletes struggle with fear. So we challenge that by having a faith over fear. Number 2, we think we conquer faith over fear by giving full effort. So we're not talking about winning or losing. We're just talking about giving full effort in everything you do. And then the third thing that happens is that it's not if you're going to get in a struggle, it's when. So when you struggle, we say the third core value is to struggle well, right? So faith over fear, full effort, struggle well. And then the last one, which we've been talking about the last couple of minutes here, is to serve others. So when we go to recruit athletes to join our Olympic Training Center, if they're not jiving with those core values, if they're not amening those core values, if they're like, I don't want to serve others, and faith over fear, that's weird. Like if they're not connecting with those core values, then we clearly are not going to recruit them, and we're not going to add them to our team.
And you need that connection and that like kind of buying in mentality if you want them to be successful, if you want to have like a good cohesive team, because like you're saying, you don't want somebody who's like, I don't want to serve others, I don't want to help, I want to just focus on myself. But I don't want to take up too much more of your time, Brandon, so we'll move into our final section, the big Q we call it. So you're making the most of your extra minutes, coaching as an athlete, you did the same thing. How can others do the same in their lives, and why should they?
I think others, they can do the same by being thoughtful of other people and not just thinking about themselves. I think human nature is to always focus on, me, myself, and I. And I think we need to fight that tooth and nail. That yes, we need to focus on ourselves to a certain degree, but I would say even more so if we're putting thinking of others first, Maria, I think that's when we're going to maximize our leadership ability. So I would just encourage all your listeners to make sure that I kind of have this great acronym I learned called the Heart of Leadership. And the H stands for the hunger for wisdom. The E is to expect the best. A is to accept responsibility, which is a big one that most people don't do. R is to respond with courage. And that last T is what we just talked about, is to think of others first. And I really think if you do all those things, that last one specifically, that's the icing on the cake, is when you think of others first, I think that's going to separate you from other people in our culture, in our society, because it's just so common for people just to solely think about themselves.
Well, now everyone knows to use that HEART acronym. I'm gonna like go and write that down. I love that.
Yeah.
HEART. Definitely going to be on my wall sometime soon. But Brandon, thank you so much for joining us. This was awesome. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, Maria, thanks for your time, and I just appreciate you caring about other people, that you would want to put this time and effort in to make sure that the great content is being shared. So kudos to you.